Hello, and welcome to the DCIFF Film Chat Podcast. I'm Erin Devost, and I'll be your host for this season. Join us for insightful interviews that explore the work of up-and-coming independent filmmakers from all over the world. If you're passionate about film and keen to learning about the creative process from the future cinema greats, this podcast is a must-listen for you. Our mission is to provide listeners with the engaging and informative conversations about successful and innovative films, including features, shorts, documentaries, animation, and web series from across the globe. The DCIFF Film Chat Podcast is a unique opportunity for independent filmmakers to have their voices heard in a way no other film festival can provide. You can listen to the DCIFF Film Chat Podcast on all podcast platforms or visit our website at DCIFF-indie.org/DCIFF-podcast. Thank you. Hey, Film Club fans. Do you have a humble mind and are searching for meaning? Well, this documentary and filmmaker I'm going to introduce you to will make you ache for something better for your own living soul and remind us that art may be humanity's truest legacy. Define Instinct, directed by James Gossard, explores the metaphysical human experiences through the art and eyes of sculptor Gary Spinosa. He stepped away from his growing reputation as a sculptor to work 7 days a week on his art as a recluse on a farm in Pennsylvania. Today, I'll be interviewing with James on the podcast, and I introduced him to him as Jim, so just wanted to give you a heads up there. But did want to also mention that there is bonus content at the end where you get to hear the exclusive Q&A that happened after his world premiere, which was featured and seen first at the DCIFF 2023 Film Forum. Really excited for you guys to join into this conversation. I hope it is eye-opening and mind-opening as it was for me and passed on to you. So let's dive in.
I've been writing in creative fields for at least 40 years. When I was 13 years old, when I first started writing, and I never stopped. So I've been writing for stage and poetry and novels and short stories. And then I got into screenwriting. And I've been teaching screenwriting, and a natural extension of that was to move into film. I was on location in Central Valley for the drama club, and the director of the drama club said, you should just go make your own movies. And he's like, go do a short, go do anything, just, go create. And so I actually leaped into this particular project because I had, producing and working on locations and on sets. And I jumped into this one to create a short, which became an entirely different beast over the course of filming. And then COVID just squashed the project down. I was prepared to let it go at that point. And then coming out of COVID, I got connected to two great editors, Bob Kaner and Matt Maddock, and we started taking all this raw material and turning it into a movie.
Power of networking with the industry is so huge, especially when it comes to independent films. And the main subject of your film, Gary Spinosa, what inspired you to want to capture his life?
When I was young, I lived up in this area for a summer, Cambridge Springs, Edinburgh, and Venango in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And I really loved that area. And my sister lives up there. So I'm up there visiting a lot. As I was driving around, the area more recently, like back around, 2015, 2016, my sister was driving me around and showing me all these artists and artisans. And it's like this place is a Bermuda Triangle of artists and artisans who kind of settle in this region and are doing some of the most beautiful work that I've seen, whether it's in pottery or painting or, Gary's sort of metaphysical work in sculpture. Mm-hmm. And I actually wanted to go in and film the whole thing. I wanted to go in and create this whole movie experience about this area and tell the stories of all these artists and how they came to be here. Because it's not a likely, in my mind, it wasn't a likely place for artists to end. It's not New York, it's not San Francisco, it's not LA, it's not Santa Fe, it's not Tucson, it's not places where I expect to find artist communities. And I don't know why not, because artists are everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And, artists exist ubiquitously, throughout our country, almost magically. But, as I looked at the production cost of trying to, go set up and tell everybody's story and collect all this information and build a story in this area, I realized it was beyond anything I could ever finance.
Yeah.
I settled on a few artists that I thought maybe would make a good story, but I was up in Pennsylvania visiting again, and my sister said, there's this artist you need to go meet, and he's got a small exhibit at the Campbell Art Gallery, which unfortunately the Campbell studio and pottery store and everything has since closed. But I walked into that exhibit and was just mesmerized by his work. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know what it was. It was sort of, to me, I guess, an existential experience to see his work and really begin to try to navigate the depths of what he was creating. A funny story, I was very close to a piece of his artwork, almost nose to nose to it. His work had that effect on me anyway, where I would see it and I would just keep getting closer and closer and closer to it. But I was just really close to this piece, and it's just like I wanted to reach out and touch it. And, an exhibit, I was, of course, not going to do that. But this voice behind me said, yeah, you can go ahead and touch it if you want. And I just turned around and I'm like, no, I can't. And it was Gary. And that's how I met him. And he's like, yeah, it's my work. Very little happened after that. I was just like, well, thank you, but I'm not going to touch your work here, because I'll knock it over and it'll break and then you'll hate me. It went on from there, and I drove up to his studio, stepped into his world and said, hey, what do you think about doing a documentary? Letting me do a documentary about your life and your work. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, okay. And here we are today. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. And the fact that you met him so naturally too.
Yeah.
In an unexpected way, but.
And even John Edwards, who's another sculptor who's a part of the story, he's in the movie, talks about how sculpture should be something that you can touch and hold in your hands and put your hands around. And he makes that observation that even a blind person should be able to go into a museum and experience art through touch. Mm. And that this, distance that we have to keep from art pieces in a museum is artificial, that we should be able to almost physically engage with the work. Yeah.
No, that's such an interesting concept, because I feel like, a lot of, even thinking of some the modern type of exhibits that are happening outside of sculptor work, it's these immersive experiences where it's just video. I went to a King Tut one, for example, but it's very cool to be able to bring the video and the sculptures.
People really, I think people hold Gary with a certain amount of definitely love, but a kind of reverence for his work and his commitment to his work, because it's all he does.
Definitely. And for those who are familiar with his work, the types of sculptures he creates.
He creates these constructions that he calls shrines. Okay, these are created out of wood and shell casings, like shotgun shell casings and mm-hmm. bullet casings and horns. He loves horns. He's got a thing about horns mm-hmm. that he builds into these sculptures. And again, you can see these in the film, because right. We have a lot of archival photography on his work. These constructs are sort of housings for what are called, he calls them stones, and they are porcelain pieces. And the interesting thing about the porcelain pieces is that they're like this. Well, this is a really tiny one.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're, generally about that big. They're hefty. You can hold them in your hand.
Mhm.
And he layers the clay mixture that he uses, and everything in the mixture that he uses, if I understand it all perfectly well, and I'm not 100% an alchemist when it comes to, creating porcelain sculpture.
Mhm.
But he doesn't use glazes to create his piece. That the colors form naturally, and he actually builds them in and layers them in a way that's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
His work, these colors are layered in naturally. So if you were to take a cross section of his work, you would see the layers of colors like cutting through a rainbow. And it's, I don't know, I think in the world of porcelain, it's kind of unique.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing the description. Like, I feel like he has a lot of different abstracts and really looks into kind of like metaphysical, but also like the metaphoric
Yes.
aspect behind a lot of that. So well done. Based on your work inside, documentaries, is there something that planning on like doing like a continuation of this documentary, or are you working on others?
My vision for this was to actually create, one is I wanted the art to have a cinematic quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
And Mauricio Ventura, who was the original director of photography, he moved on to LA and he's moved overseas since. He and I worked on the vision, our first shooting of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to create a cinematic experience around the art itself. Like food is photographed in Chef's Table, if you're familiar with Chef's Table,
Mm-hmm.
where sometimes, they're filming up through a glass table up from below to create a new image for the food that's being created by a great chef. We didn't have a large budget, so we weren't able to do a lot of the photography that we wanted to do, but we were able to, in many ways, create the experience with what we had and what we were working with. And so the original concept was to build this as a pilot, telling a similar type story where there's a narrative thread to the artist's life, maybe an arc. In the case of Divine Instinct, there's more of a narrative thread than a dramatic arc, which, many folks are looking for in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But we were going to use that as a pilot. And then we had a number of other artists that were, who were interested in being able to come in and do like 30-minute episodes or 40-minute episodes of their life, their work, because there's so many incredible artists out there. They have, a small enclave of people who know them and collect them. And
Mm-hmm.
my vision, which, is yet to be realized, was to be able to create this cinematic opportunity for these stories to be told. So we're not doing the documentaries on Picasso and, famous painters and Rodin. We're focusing on the stories of artists who might just disappear into oblivion over time.
Yeah.
Because their story isn't told and there's no effort to elevate their work into a collection someplace where it would be sustained for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, because I feel like artwork in that respect is so timeless, and being able to really see the image of today, but how it brings in like to the past and even like the future in that aspect. So kind of like relating like on that note, seeing like you want to continue this into a feature, develop like the series, but I also can see how like the film industry is creating these spaces to create that type of content, whether it's like kind of starting out with some like a subject and then being able to continue into that series. Do you find like the industry is going in that way?
If I look at this story, I'm not sure it belongs in the 90-minute vessel, because which is what this story is. It's, it's an 89-minute film. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot in it. But I do think that stories like this in a 30 to 40-minute block of time can be told and be particularly meaningful and permit the creation of a story that can be told, but less expensively. Mm-hmm. Because, fielding crew and feeding crew and moving crew into places where we don't normally go costs money. And it's great for a young filmmaker to pull a crew together and everybody's energetic about it and they're not, and they're all putting in their time and their creative energy. But the cost of real production and providing livelihoods for people who are working in the industry is very different than that. What do you do as a young filmmaker? Mm-hmm. So the one thing I don't know whether young filmmakers are being properly tooled up for this is, but how do you create a budget for a film? How do you know what the real costs are? And then how do you raise those kind of funds? And then what are the legal things that you have to have in place? We did all of that to create this piece. Divine Instinct required all the releases and all those pieces that are very important to be able to tell someone's story.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the picture in the sense of like what young filmmakers should think about, like when it comes to wanting to set like the foundation of themselves, as you said, like the budgeting, but also thinking about like the location aspect, like how you want the vision to come to light. So I think there's something that maybe has stood out to you that you could see more of coming down the road.
When I set out to do Divine Instinct, it was called the Spinosa Project. It was, it's like a cool name. And it was about Spinosa. So it was that was the catchy title. Mm-hmm. I felt a very strong sense of urgency to be able to tell the story of artists. And I did not want famous artists. I think, I mentioned that already, but I wanted to find artists whose work resonated with me. So Gary was one in that area in Pennsylvania. And then there's Edna Doe, who's a Maine painter, brilliant artist who I visited last year. And Travis Somerville, who is a San Francisco artist and a real master of social elements around racism in this country. And those are the stories I wanted to be able to tell. Whether or not there's a market for them, I'm still not 100% sure. I haven't been able to tap into it, but in my heart of hearts, I believe that that's something that needs to be told, because I think certain lives drifting into oblivion with the creative work that comes from these, I would just say, beautiful people who are committing their life to creating magnificent work is important. So I would hope that there would be a place for it in whatever streaming world is going to exist and say, yeah, this is a really cool idea. Let's build this concept out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's true or not. Yeah. But to a young aspiring filmmaker, my advice, and I would say this pretty much to any creative, is you have to go where you believe the story is. Mm-hmm. If you try to create the story for the market, then you're not really following heart, unless the market and money is where your heart is. So if you believe you have an idea, even if it doesn't work out the way you envision it to work out, I think that's the story that young filmmakers or anybody starting out in film, mm-hmm. that's what they should do. I'm loath to be the one to tell somebody that their story isn't worth telling. Yeah. Because I think that's a personal journey. And I could have my opinion about it. And I've taught a lot of screenwriters in their work. But my job isn't to tell them what they should be creating. And I think it's important that I not cross that boundary. But the one boundary I will cross is that I believe people should go for the story they believe they have, that they want to tell. And if it can become something bigger over time, great. But if it's something small and it launches a career or launches, a life in film, then that's what people should be doing.
Definitely. I love that. And that kind of goes into the tagline in your poster, which is like, a humble mind, like in the search for meaning. So I feel like that in a way, like is a twofold for me that I could see, like fully believing in yourself, like finding that search of meaning, but no, don't stop believing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I really liked that, and how it even well runs into that aspect. And
it took me 2 years to develop that tagline.
Really?
Oh, and is that true?
Yes.
I can't even remember the origin tagline I had, but I hated it the whole time that I kept the journey through before I came to it. And I think it was Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. was a really profound experience for me. I read it in like 1969, so I date myself. But it was sort of that essence that I wanted to bring into Gary's story, which is that sort of metaphysical, existential existence that we have as humans.
Absolutely. And I know that in the beginning, you talked a little bit about the pandemic too. And I feel like that really correlates with a lot of people, how they were feeling in that moment too. You know who you are in the sense of what you want to do and have continued that and inspire filmmakers. So I really want to thank you for that. Definitely learned like a lot from you in terms of, not only like the aspect of the film, but seeing like, the deeper meaning of what it is. And so I would love to hear how folks can find you.
Oh, you can find me at gossardproductions.com. You can find me at divineinstinct.com. On that website, there's even a way you can contact me. So
awesome.
I think it says contact us, and whatever communication comes through that website, it ultimately gets to me.
Definitely.
So that's an easy way for people to reach out to me if they're interested in the project or have questions.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
That's been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I had such a great time and such a pleasure meeting Jim in person right before his world premiere. Now, let's dive in to the Q&A that I know you are all eagerly awaiting to hear more of the questions and also hearing from guests Gary Spinosa, the subject of the film, and also sculptor John Edwards for their perspectives.
Is there anything, we're going to bring our artist up, but is there anything you especially want to say, having made this film, about what it means to you personally in your life?
For me, it kind of represented my own sort of existential journey, trying to, sort out what existence actually means to a human. And so for me, it always comes back to art. I've been an artist my whole life as a writer, and it always comes back to art. And that's where I find meaning. And that's when I can explore it through another artist. I don't always have to know what I think it means, but I do have an emotional experience with it. And I wanted this film to be that kind of experience, something a little deeper and more meaningful, but something that, frankly, would mean something potentially different to every person who saw it.
That's lovely. What do you think about the medium of film doing that? I'd like to think that's a good medium.
I think it's an awesome medium, yeah. Yeah, and I have to say that.
Yes, kind of do.
The thing I really liked about this was one of the ideas behind the film was like, let's take art and have a cinematic experience with the art so that the art is front and center. And one of the things that inspired the making of the film and the photography was Chef's Table. Having the camera come up underneath a glass table to create a different cinematic experience for the food that was being created by these master chefs. And so it kind of Mauricio Ventura, the original DT on the project, and I had that as the vision for this work.
Lovely. Okay, I believe there are a couple of sculptors in our presence.
Gary Spinosa.
Gary Spinosa and John Edwards. You want to join us? And so I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I really think it's important for the audience. So the first question I just want to know, I think I'm a toucan. Okay, I've always thought I was a toucan. I think I'm supposed to save them. I go to places where I can see them, and I might have a problem, and I have a toucan problem. Do you have a spirit animal?
I have a number of them. There was the part in the film about the muskox, the experience I had with it where I felt a kinship. Down in Kentucky where I used to live, they were building a new Ford plant, and they started digging up all of these Indian artifacts. And this little duck head from a pot came to me through that collecting, and I almost feel like I've had an experience similar to what you're talking about, maybe. So the duck image, and I I like the combination of something that might feel spiritual and yet also kind of funny, that's okay and good to incorporate kind of diverse things. I allow myself to do that. It's okay to laugh at it or to experience something metaphysical. So there's a little bit.
There's the first. Jim, do you have a spirit animal?
It would be the goshawk.
Sorry, so yeah.
Yeah, the goshawk. I was nicknamed Goshawk in college, and it just stuck. And so I always felt like I was a wolf, but I had to go with Goshawk, and it stuck with me for a long, long time.
John, you got one?
No, I don't really.
Would you like us to give you one? I'm sure we could choose one.
Absolutely.
Nothing specific that way.
No, my whole artistic drive was towards the human form. Animals didn't have what Gary sees in them for me, so they just weren't all that compelling. But I'm glad they know Gary, because he certainly expands my understanding of my limitations.
So let's start with you again, and then talk a bit about what sculpture means here in the modern world. I actually don't know much about your sculpture. I'm of complete ignorance here, so you can tell us.
But my sculpture.
Yes, what you do.
Well, I started off as a realist because I was working in a public museum, and so we needed things like hands and feet for mannequins, and so I was drawn to physically accurate sculpture, and it was easy. And but then the more I studied the history of sculpture, I realized that the best figurative sculpture veers dramatically away from realism. And the best example of that we all know of is Michelangelo, who is considered a realistic sculptor. And when you look at his art, he distorts all of his figures. None of them are close to being accurate. But you don't see it because he's using that distortion to other ends. And that's a revelation. Once you realize you can stretch figures and stretch limbs, make things like the right hand of the David is way too big for that figure and understood to be, and to a purpose. Michelangelo is trying to say something. And when you're a young artist and you realize, but he can get away with this, maybe I can too. That process keeps going and going and going until you stretch it as far as you can. And so that's what my sculpture is doing right now. It's trying to be recognizably human figures while being as warped as I can get away with.
Gary, how did you respond to that? Are you looking to warped figures?
Yeah, I take great liberties with the human figure. I mean, I've had, in art school, I had life drawing and anatomy and everything, but when I sculpt the human figure, I do it intuitively, and the way I make a curve or something, I feel it, and I don't want to be limited by the actual anatomy. And I think that's okay to do. And I live with a couple of stray cats, so I'm an animal person. Everybody isn't an animal person, but.
So I'm going to throw this over, but I had just a couple of questions I was really intrigued personally. One is, you say that your work is going to last a long time. Is your process actually going to mean that this work is potentially going to be findable in 1,000 years' time? Well, the fired ceramic work should be, if it doesn't break, because I think there's clay images from Egypt that might be 3,000 years old. Or, if a piece is I bury my work with my animals when they die. And, if you dug that up 3, 4, 5, 1,000 years from now, it would still be there. Especially if it's high fired clay,
And I think part of the deal is when I grew up, they told us that the Russians had atomic bombs and everything, and we had them, and something might happen one day. So that made me think about the survivability of the art. Like, will it burn? Will it decay? Because we may get all blown up and everything will just get buried. So that slot in history that I was in, I think made me think about the communicating power existing for a long time, like that it could be an artifact.
So you're dealing with life and death, but you're creating something that's trying to overcome death.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak from beyond the grave.
That is very lovely. I'm going to hand this out. So I'm going to throw out one question. Again, this is a kind of personal one. So the Virgin of Guadalupe images always have roses in it, and a lot of your work has roses in it. Is that intentional?
No, but I do work with a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary image. I mean, maybe subconsciously that goes together, but I didn't consciously do that.
Okay. Folks, let me hand this over to anybody who has a question.
Congratulations to everybody. That was just so enjoyable, so well done. All of you, question to all of you as you represent a variety of different art forms up there, writing, producing, sculptures, paintings, whatever. How do you get a sense when a piece is done? When do you feel it's ready?
You want me to start? I'll start that one. Because I'm a writer. And a piece is done when it gets published. I will keep working it until, my mind is raw with it. And sometimes it takes a long time, and other times it happens. But once it's in print, I look at it and I go, okay, that piece is finally finished, and I can move away from that because it's out in the world. And so for me as a writer, that's when it's done. Gary?
That can be a difficult thing to know. Is it finished? Is it good enough? And I even had the experience where I produced this piece of sculpture. My main collector bought it. It's hanging on the wall in his house. And I visited him maybe a couple years later. I'm looking at it going, it's not finished. If you want to take a chance, I'll take it home and finish it. I don't know if I'm going to ruin it or what, but I could tell I wasn't finished. And so I tried to have integrity. And I tend to overwork things. That's kind of a form of risk taking because you might ruin it. But there's so much that's intuitive. I guess I depend on that. Sometimes it helps to sleep on it. Like, I don't know if it's done or not. And the next day you might get up and go, it's not done at all. Something happened during your sleep. So that can be part of it also.
I think there's a certain connectivity between human and animal that as humans we think we are either above or different or separate from animals. And I think the actual reality is we're not at all, even a little bit. And the more I look at the way humans communicate and the way animals communicate, to me, we're really all the same. And there's more connectivity between us and animals. So I think we distinguish ourselves through art because that's a manifestation of something very existential about us as humans, but it doesn't place us above animals. And so the merging of animals with humans and the human form and the animal forms, whether they're precise or not, is really the essence of our creation, whatever that means, in life on this planet. And there's a grace there that we lose by thinking we as humans are different or better than animals, and that our place on the planet is more important than an animal's place on the planet. So we should put a road wherever we want or build a building wherever we want, irrespective of what that does to another creature on the planet. So I think what we're getting, or what I'm alluding to in Gary's work, and why I like the connectivity of those, the human with the animal, is that it brings us back to that elemental wonderfulness of life on this planet, where we need to create a sustainable way of living as opposed to one trying to master another.
I loved how many themes and ideas you tackled in the film. So my question is, how many of those themes and ideas did you know you wanted to dive into in pre-production versus how much of it came together while you were filming it and while you're editing it?
Oh boy. It started with drinks in Fells Point. No, actually, thematically, there were a lot of those pieces. I had written a script which was storyboarded at first, just storyboard. And then the more I spoke with Gary, the more things began to crystallize. So there was a process where I think about half of what I was trying to explore thematically, I had in my head and on paper going into the initial filming. And then as the story began to unfold, themes started to materialize. And also order kind of came into my life in Gary's insane studio and house, which is so cluttered. And sorry, Gary, I'm talking about this, but after a couple of years of spending, time in his studio, I was standing there. I can't remember what we were filming, but I was standing there amidst all this madness, and I suddenly saw the pattern of how it was all organized. And I heard in the language, I just thought, holy shit, this makes sense. I can see how this comes together. Things like I began to feel the yin and yang. And then in 2021, filming in November in Sandusky, to kind of pick up these final pieces that I wanted to get. One of the shrines had a yin and yang creation with cows, I think. And there it was, and it was like, wow, I was exploring this, and here it is, and this is the piece of art that actually I wanted on Gary's that somebody else bought. So a lot of it came from early interviews and talking to Gary, and then as the interviews went on and the exploration of his work and his thinking started to materialize, and we had discovery in the process of filming. Those things were added to the script. By the time we finished the script for the editor, it was 167 pages long, and kind of crystallized into what you saw here.
One question came up. So these stones, are we supposed to carry them in our pockets? Are they?
They are portable art. I think there's a tradition of that in the world in a lot of different cultures, and I'm participating in that mobile sculpture. And you can give it to somebody to maybe mark an occasion. It's portable. I started making the small pieces, would wrap them in these ornate wrappings and drop them in the mailbox, and they would go out to California, New England, and all over. So that was part of the original reason I started doing the small things, was to communicate with friends. And there may not be much of a letter, but they get this object to mark this point in our friendship and life and everything.
I'm going to give you my address. I think if we're wrapping up, Jim, I'm going to hand this to you to point out and thank people in the audience who helped you make this film happen.
Yeah, I think what would be really cool, you're all going to hate me, but I think it would be really cool. I'd like all the crew to come down, all the people that worked on this, because really, it's many hands that make it. It's not one man's intentional.
I'm not going to follow you that you had this idea and you brought it into reality. We just experienced like a vision that you had. So
This podcast is brought to you by the DCIFF supporters. We could not be here without all of you to be sharing this amazing outlet with filmmakers from around the world. If you are interested in supporting DCIFF, head on over to our website through the link description in the bio of this episode, or you can go right to the website, which is DCIFF-indie.org, to connect with us and learn more about our Future of Film programs, our festival, and also more educational opportunities in what we do with our high school students, community, and beyond. We look forward to your support.